complicated question.
Okay, I've heard that in some cases it's not.
See, there are a lot of things to consider, but under some situations they will count that as minimum wage. But to quickly answer that, I mean, I suspect, so from a legal perspective, probably what's going on there is that the state of Washington is basically certifying people's compliance with what I said, but basically the standards I said before for what counts as a real internship. The reason I say that is because of course, the state of Washington can't override federal law. So they have absolutely no authority to authorize farms to pay less than the federal minimum wage, unless what they're doing is either A, subsidizing the farms to help bump up the pay to minimum wage, which incidentally is a great idea, and an idea that states have used in other contexts, particularly, oftentimes, I know, kind of nasty, but prison labor, on parolee labor. States will often pay people, they'll say you contribute half of the minimum wage, and we'll contribute the other half if you will employ this person who's on parole. That's a program I've seen elsewhere that can probably be applied in a much nicer context in the case of farms. But so basically I suspect, like I said, that what they're doing is just certifying functionally that federal law is being complied with and promising that they're not going to send their own Department of Labor to, punish you. And that also seems like a pretty great program.
Yeah, I understand the central issue as being, are they displacing employees and is it for education? Who's enforcing that and what does that look like?
So there are three ways, well, basically two ways to enforce it. Way number one is sometimes they check up on you. That is, the feds less frequently, state labor agencies more frequently will show up at a work site, say, let me see the records, and will then, have civil or criminal penalties against employers who don't comply with them. And these could be, all kinds of penalties. I mean, the tax laws get involved.
Are they like trespass?
Well,
I'm sorry.
I mean, if you say keep out, they'll probably find a legal way to get in one way or another. Warrants could get involved. It's not hard to get records when they want them.
Well, when you say records, what kind of records? What are they looking for?
Well, so employers are required to keep wage and hour records, for example. If those aren't present, then they're going to start asking very heavy questions. Well, first of all, then there's already been a violation. But second, then they're going to start asking very heavy questions and doing a more detailed investigation. But the second way is that employees themselves bring private lawsuits. So I actually, when I was practicing farm worker law, brought a number of minimum wage lawsuits against farms based on, not on apprenticeships or internships. These were much nastier situations where they were taking, undocumented workers and not paying them. But it's another, and that's also a very consequential thing. If you piss off an intern and you get hit with a lawsuit, I mean, there's triple damages, there's attorney fees. I mean, things get expensive and unpleasant very quickly.
Has anyone in this room had that check up occur on their phone?
Wow. I believe what this is.
Okay, well, I'll talk about it briefly. A guy from the state...
EDD.
What?
EDD?
Yeah, the Labor Commission.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I thought it was Employment Development Department?
It was Labor Commission.
Okay.
I mean, it's all alphabet soup.
Yeah. And he came directly into the field without asking for a supervisor, without asking for any sort of. It was very informal, and he had regular outfit on and everything. And I was at a different part of the property, but he ended up talking to two individual people who are under the kind of like title of apprentice, and talked to them separately without obviously like no run through or introduction or anything. It's like, what's your name? Do you work here? How much do you get paid? How do you get paid? And that was pretty much it. And they had two different stories, and it was a mess. And yeah, so we have a court hearing on Wednesday.
Incidentally, on the trespassing issue, by the way, just to mention again, I don't know what California's law is, but some states actually have laws specifically allowing certain kinds of entry onto land to talk to workers. Actually, when I was a legal aid lawyer in Oregon, and I was actually, there was a special exception to Oregon property laws carved out for us that allowed us to show up at farm worker housing that was on people's land to talk to the workers and say, hey, are you being screwed? Let me know and we'll take them down. So, trespassing is sort of not even on the radar here for most of this stuff.
It's somewhat related somehow, maybe it fits in a different category, but sometimes with CSAs, there will be a work component. And, it's a volunteer thing.
For the customer.
So, for the customer, the one who, pays for their vegetables. And these are still businesses. They're not nonprofits, because I'm assuming businesses aren't allowed to have volunteers, but nonprofits are because of the different legal status. So how does that work, that those volunteers are allowed to go in and do work? That's the whole idea, is that you are kind of, in a way perhaps you're getting a lower rate for your vegetable box because you're working or something. But again, that's kind of one of those things that, how is there not a way for volunteers to work on the farm when they want to? They say, I want to, lots of people give to nonprofits, of their time. Mm-hmm. And, to a lot of the community, just the average person, they, in a way, look at small farmers, the sustainable ones, in a way as a nonprofit, because they are so community-oriented and involved, and so, they want to give back to the farm.
Yeah, so. That's the first thing I'd say is there's a pretty big difference between, you give a couple hours of work as a work trade in exchange for receiving some goods, and for all intents and purposes being an employee minus the getting paid part. And there's a spectrum here. And, sort of somewhere, and it's a fairly broad spectrum from, I work at my local co-op to, I like, do my work hour this month, to I'm being grievously exploited, and the line between legality and illegality is somewhere toward the middle of the spectrum. So it's not quite so cut and dried. The other note I'd make is that really sort of the for-profit, non-profit status doesn't matter that much. It matters a lot for tax purposes. Basically the for-profit, non-profit status distinction is pretty close to 100% of tax distinction, and it's hugely consequential with the IRS, but much less so with respect to employment laws of various kinds.
So if it sounds like there's a lot of gray area there, is there a way that farmers can define a program of education and maybe quantify what it would cost in giving room and board in exchange for working, to then not be at legal risk for not paying a worker? If somebody wants to volunteer and they're getting room and board and they're getting, does it have to be a formal program of education and or
it's really about
timelines of how long they're working? Like if it's indefinitely, then it's could be seen as worker.
Yeah, indefinitely is actually another big issue. Is ordinarily, if the ordinary sort of educational programs have something like a defined end date, and there's no guarantee that you'll be there beyond that. And that's actually one of the things listed in the Department of Labor regulations that I didn't mention.
So they do look at that.
They do look at that. But there's no eliminating risk in this kind of situation. What there is reducing risk and putting yourself somewhere toward the happy side of the gray area rather than the less happy side of the gray area. And I'd really say, that the two chief issues, the two big things are, does this really look like an educational program? And does this, is this something that's meant to be, or that looks like they're displacing normal workers and, sort of acting like a worker in terms of the employer's bottom line? And those are the lodestar issues that you have to worry about. I don't think we haven't heard from you before.
What about a different approach of cutting the temporary workers in as a temporary minor partner in the business, so that there would be risk and potential for profit? I mean, because if the